In this video, we will learn the concepts of consumer surplus and producer surplus and learn to calculate both. With regards to demand, there is a concept called consumer surplus, which basically measures the satisfaction of a consumer with the price. So that consumer surplus is the difference between the maximum price that consumers are willing and able to pay for a good or service and the price they're actually paying. So here is the demand curve. You're familiar with it. We have price on the y-axis, quantity on the x-axis, and a downward sloping demand curve. We have price P1 and quantity Q1. Let's take this point here, and we can see that the demand represents the price that the consumers are willing to pay for that quantity of a good. So this quantity, the consumers are willing to pay a lot higher than the actual price that exists in the market, which is P1. And that is the case for all of these prices at which the demand curve is above the price level. We call this area the consumer surplus. So essentially, the consumer surplus is the area above the price and below the demand curve. So if the price is P1, consumer surplus in this case is the dark green triangle. Let's say we have a price P2. All of a sudden the price went down. Are consumers happy when the price goes down? Yes, they are. And that is reflected in the consumer surplus being higher. In this case, the consumer surplus is, again, the area above the line P2, which is right here, and below the demand curve. So that big triangle is now the new consumer surplus. The light green area represents the additional surplus due to lower prices for the previous quantities purchased. But the yellow area represents the additional surplus due to more goods being consumed, because at this lower price, the consumers want to consume more goods. Then there is producer surplus. That is essentially the measure of satisfaction of producers with the price. It is defined as the difference between the price that producers receive for a good or service and the minimum price they're willing and able to accept. So here we have the supply curve. You can see that the y-axis is the price, the x-axis is the quantity, and the upward sloping supply curve means that as the price goes up, producers are willing to supply more of this good. Suppose we are operating at price P1 and quantity Q1. Now, at lower quantities, the producers are actually willing to accept a lower price. But the price that exists in the market is higher. And so they're enjoying that difference between the higher price that exists in the market and the price that they're getting for that lower quantity. And that is true for all of the prices that are below the price. So for all of the area at which the supply curve is below the price line. So the red triangle represents the producer surplus. And graphically, we say that is the area below the price line and above the supply curve. What if the price were to go up? Would the producers be happy about it? Yes, because they're receiving that price. That is part of their profit. So now the producer surplus represents the area below the price P2 and above the supply curve. The light red area represents the additional surplus due to more goods being sold, and the yellow area represents additional surplus due to higher prices for previous quantities sold. Now the Total surplus or economic surplus represents the sum of the consumer and producer surplus. So we're saying that market is efficient when the total surplus is maximized. So when the consumers and producers' satisfaction with the price or gains from participating in the market are maximized. If we calculate welfare at the equilibrium, we are looking at price P1 here. And so the area above the price and below the demand curve represents the consumer surplus. That's the dark green area. The area below the price line and above the supply curve represents the producer surplus. That's the dark red area. Let's go over a problem in which we find a consumer surplus, a producer surplus, and a total surplus. So looking at this market for coal here, we have the price of coal in dollars and quantity in tons. We see that this market is in equilibrium. The equilibrium point dictates the price that exists in the market, which is $60, and the quantity that exists in the market, that is $400. How do we find the consumer surplus? Remember, the consumer surplus is the area above the price and below the demand curve. So it's this shaded area right here. To find it, we need to find the area of this triangle. That would be height times base divided by 2. The height of the triangle is 100 minus 60. The base of the triangle is 400 minus 0 divided by 2 is 16,000. What if we need to find the producer surplus? Producer surplus is the area below the price and above the supply curve. So it's this blue shaded area right here. That is also a right triangle, so we can find it by multiplying height, which is 60 minus 20, by base, which is 400 minus 0, divided by 2. It is also 16,000. And now if we wanted to calculate the total surplus, that is this whole area of producer and consumer surplus, which is 32,000. Now imagine an example in which a price ceiling is imposed and the price is actually $40. So price ceiling is basically a price that is pushed lower below the equilibrium level, and that should benefit consumers. How can we calculate the consumer and producer surplus in this case? Well, one thing to remember is that now the price is $40. That is our new price. But at this new price, the quantity is lower, and the quantity is dictated by the producers. You can see the point at which the price intersects with the supply curve, and that dictates how much good is actually produced. So producers at this lower price are unwilling to produce more or sell more than 200 units of the good. So they dictate how much is actually traded in the market. So what would the consumer surplus be in this case? The consumer surplus is the area above the price but below the demand curve. However, it is not a triangle anymore, and that is because we are stopped by the quantity that is traded in the market. We cannot trade more than 200. So now this new shaded area is our new consumer surplus. And to calculate this area, we can separate it into a triangle and a rectangle. So the area of a rectangle will be 80 minus 40 times 200 minus 0. The area of the triangle will be 800 minus 80 times 200 minus 0 divided by 2. What about the producer surplus? Producer surplus would be the area, this blue area here, which is 40 minus 20 times 200 minus 0 divided by 2. which is equal to 4,000. So now you can see that both consumer surplus and producer surplus are lower, and that is because of the missing trades that occurred. This magenta triangle represents the missing trades or dead weight loss that occurs when the price ceiling is imposed. So now the total surplus, which is consumer surplus plus producer surplus, is going to be just 16,000. Maximizing welfare means that we operate at the equilibrium in which consumer surplus and producer surplus are at their highest, and altogether the total economic surplus is at its highest. If we were to impose a higher price in this market, which is called the price floor, the consumer surplus would suffer. But the producer surplus would also suffer because it would be missing the trades. Because at this higher price, which is higher than the equilibrium price, consumers are unwilling to buy more than QT of the good. So they're missing trades, and so that gray triangle is representing the deadweight loss. If we were to impose a lower price in this market, such as price P3, this lower price means that the producers are now dictating how much is traded in the market. They're unwilling to produce the equilibrium quantity. So now they produce only quantity QT, and the producer surplus suffers, but so does the consumer surplus, also because of these missing trades that did not occur, and that is our missing economic surplus or deadweight loss. So the deadweight loss is the value of the economic surplus that is foregone when the market is not allowed to adjust to its competitive equilibrium.